I really enjoyed that session. It was really interesting, very thought-provoking. I have a question that I'll ask in two ways. I'll first ask it in a kind of cheeky way, and then I'll ask it in a hopefully more constructive way. And it's a question that's directed towards Tim and Daniel, both of whom, both of you mentioned this problem you have with your students when you say to your students, what kind of future would you envision? And they're blank, they're quiet. And that could be quite a pessimistic note. However, then we saw two talks, at least if not more, they said maybe there's more going on than that. So the cheeky way to ask the question is, are you guys asking the wrong question? Or are you not asking, are you asking the right question but doing it in the wrong way? And the more constructive way to ask the question, I suppose, would be, could you reflect a little bit on how education might work towards enhancing civil society? Were those connections across a sort of more formalised education and a more community-based learning, if you like?
I'm just going to depress you, right? I'm going to say the two of them are different. Right? They're hippies, they're whatever. They're guerrillas, right? They're urban guerrillas, and they're different. They are a special breed, and there are very few of them. I'm involved in politics in Singapore, so I can claim to know the 80% who live in public housing estates, and those are my students. Right? So that's the key thing, and I think there is that problem here. And the problem is not just the fact that they are different, but that there is a space between them and the rest. Right? And it's not their fault. It's the way the urban has been structured and spatialized in Singapore, so that you end up in Little India and Bowell Road, and you can't function within, let's say, a HDB space in Bedok, let's say, right, in which you can spread your memes around and inspire the neighborhoods fellas to imagine differently. I have my own counter examples from Hong Kong, for example, in which activists like yourselves are actually inserting themselves into the urban fabric among ordinary people and trying to infect them with their memes. They can do that because that space there allows them for them to do it. Here, the space is so regulated, it's almost impossible for them to actually survive market forces, survive governmental regulation, survive all kind of intrusions from para-governmental agencies and whatnot. And policymakers are a few steps behind you, but they are behind you. Right? So the example I'd like to give is, in 1990s, Homi Bhabha proposed hybridity. In 2003, the Minister for Culture equivalent here in Singapore mentioned hybridity in his speech. So it's appropriation, the cultural appropriation of concepts from the social sciences. And the lead time is about 10 years. Why? Because we train them and we teach them hybridity for 4 years. They graduate, they enter the civil service, and they teach their upstairs, their superiors. And about 10 years' time, the concepts get appropriated by the state, and the state actualizes and operationalizes it in the top-down way. So these are the kind of issues in Singapore I think we need to tackle.
I'm smiling, but I'm really depressed.
I think part of this might have to do with Daniel not feeling very well today. This is an extreme case of something I usually hear in my more diluted form. At the risk of damaging our collaborative energies, I don't hold quite as pessimistic a view as Daniel. I think, so if we go, obviously in a 10-minute talk I have to abbreviate everything, right? So if we go back to that moment in the class when I asked those kind of questions, I think that, I wasn't wrong to say that the first impulse is to give those stereotypical answers, right? But I also don't think you don't have to press very much longer before people start to come up with other kinds of responses. And so I think there's a difference between, I don't think the gap that Daniel described, in my view, is not as vast or insurmountable as he might suggest, for many of our students at least, right? I was talking to Ananya before about the sort of stereotype that many non-Singaporean lecturers have when they come to teach here about, the Asian student that's very quiet and doesn't express critical views and such like. But my thinking about that is that if you set the right kinds of incentives for students to think critically here, they will do it because they want to do well, right? So in other words, if you set the assignment, your assignment this week is to think about the progressive grassroots energies and all kinds of exciting innovations that are happening around you in your estate, and you set that as an essay for credit, then it will come up as a really good thing, right? So whether the kind of motivation for doing that is right, I don't know. But I do stand by my notion that there is something still very, I think it's a legacy of modernisation theory, it's a legacy of a kind of post-colonial understanding of the world, but there's still a really troubling valorization, not just of elsewheres, but of particular elsewheres, and especially in the West, and an associated lack of willingness, at least in the first instance, to see all kinds of possibly progressive things, albeit often on very small scales, in particular, maybe temporary spaces, in Singapore itself and elsewhere beyond the West, as potentially, really interesting progressive models, not only for here in Singapore, but elsewhere as well. So in other words, the initial response that I get or don't get in class is, it doesn't take much to get a little bit further.
Thanks everyone, this was a fantastic panel. Just to think more about aspirations, I'm curious about, so I feel like we saw a couple different aspirations here. One was sort of like a top level, like state planners set of aspirations, and another was sort of a set of insurgent aspirations. How can this community resist, and how can people become? I want to think about aspirations not as sort of a set of norms, but rather as a sort of relational, like a process that's based on citations. And I want to challenge us to think beyond progressivism as a model for aspirations, specifically around the eco or the village or the community. Earlier there was a talk and get sort of frame gated communities as a problem. And I'm hoping that we can, I wonder if you could reflect on insurgency as a model for students, or otherwise. Anand used to teach agonism as sort of a mode of thinking about cities. And so I wonder what would happen if we reframed aspirations as something that could be insurgent rather than normative.
Because I think, although I talk a lot about art, mainly about art spaces, but one of the things that we're very interested in is, at Post Museum, is the idea of land contestation. There was a little slide about Bukit Brown, and we've been very obsessed with Bukit Brown, both for the ghosts whatsoever, and for the activism. But I think one of the problems that we face in, I think in civil society, is actually this idea that we actually never, I don't know, this is a way that, you flip the table and say, this is too much, right? But this table is too heavy. But I think what's interesting is that if we were to observe activism or civil society movements, sometimes we tend to have this very strange habit of absorbing the rhetoric of why we. So one of the things that keep coming up when activists sort of reason that we need to save this space, and then you come up with something like, but we need to adhere to market forces. And then you come up with an economic plan for the place you want to save. But actually, all these plans is already planned. What I think activists need to do, or people need to do, is to stop thinking that only urban planners and architects have the right to the city. I think that how do we kind of explain the language, or how do we kind of have access to this language of change? And how can we be agents of change? I think that's one of the things that I would like to think about.
Thank you. I actually wanted to start by Francis's the provocation, because I think that was showing this, at least in a certain generation of Singapore, that there's quite a bit of encroachment onto areas without permission, and as well as a kind of, I guess it made me think of another talk I've seen recently by an architect, Chong Keng Hua. I don't know if you guys, some of you might know him, he's a Singaporean architect, but he's been working on a project about creative aging, but it's looking at sort of different kinds of appropriations of HCD spaces and how people are redesigning them and living in them in quite unusual ways. But someone asked him a question that, oh, all these estates, they don't really look like sort of the new Punggol estate. So it seems that there may be a generational difference in the way people are inhabiting these kinds of, both of which are very state planned spaces. So I was wondering if, and anybody can answer this, but whether there's some resources in older generations of Singaporeans to draw from for imagining new ways of sort of, or building on new ways of imagining and living in Singapore, rather than just arguing that the youth are a problem because they're not the same as sort of more creative youth or more activist youth in other places. It's actually maybe, what about the older generations within Singapore? Is that a resource that can be used?
Sorry, but I'm thinking actually that, because one of the things that we do as when we campaign for things, and for example the Bukit Brown campaign where we were to talk to people, we found actually a lot of things that we learned along the way. The problem here, I mean the problem that we kind of face is that we kind of never really, at first we sort of went about doing it, but we didn't realize that there was a methodology in terms of campaigning. There are strategies and there are ways. And I think that it's probably very interesting, but we found that we didn't really have that kind of resources in terms of manpower to talk to everybody. And I think that what Carl mentioned was that we really need to sort of explore what kind of knowledge is sort of lost or not actually harvested for us to understand better. Because we tend to think that everything is special, Singapore is so special, but actually probably it's not. That there must be some similarities that we can sort of harness the knowledge and sort of apply it in our own context.
So just to take it back partly to the academic side of things, so the work that we've been doing on aspirations draws upon the work of an Indian anthropologist, Arjun Appadurai, who wrote this essay about how culture has, especially in the social sciences, tended to be associated with the past, with pastness. I was really interested listening to you two, thinking, culture is also, culture inverted commas, and also about bringing people together to think differently, to think otherwise, to think futures, right? To push boundaries, to use the term that Francis used. But at the same time, in moving culture, in orienting culture to presentness and futurity, there's a danger that you lose sight of various pasts as resources, right? So kind of, in a more conventional sense, cultural archives of ways of doing things, ways of seeing differently, and acknowledging that those archives can be really important for reinvigorating, or sorry, go back to using the term more progressive futures, but alternative futures of various kinds. I was struck by the mention of the notion of Gotong Royong, so this idea of people working together collectively. In some places that ideal gets taken up by state institutions, for particular kind of projects. So there's that danger, right? But at the same time, there are ways in which we can use those memories of certain kinds of practices and certain kinds of ideals in ways which reinvigorate community practice and constellations of new constellations of people which aren't necessarily communities in the conventional sense.
So this is perhaps more a reflection than a question. I would love an answer to it. And it's perhaps tangentially related to the panel. It also relates to John's provocation. So I've been hearing the phrase for the last couple of days, top-down planning. And in a way, and our aversion to top-down planning. And hidden in that is perhaps, and elsewhere, that somewhere planning is not top-down. And I don't know where that is the case, and if so, how and why that is necessarily a good thing. And so there's an imagination here of, I think, of non-Asian elsewheres, where planning is not top-down and where bottom-up demands are fantastic. And I think about what is now my home country, the United States. And boy, would I love some top-down planning. Boy, would I love the federal government to do some top-down planning, right? Because the bottom-up demands, say in California, are of powerful developers and powerful landlords, or they are of the most successful form of direct democracy that now exists in the global north, which are homeowners associations, right? Rallying around property. And you all know this, as, you know, so I'm preaching to the choir. So I'm wondering though here how our framing of these issues and our vocabularies might impede the ways in which we imagine and act on alternatives, or also what our aspirations then are of progressivism or alternatives. That's my pessimism for the day.
Yeah, as usual, Ananya, I can't reply in a way which is articulated as well as you just said it. But I think one thing that strikes me about what you said then was that you ultimately grounded your comment and your experience back to where you're located at the moment, just as John did, just as we all have done in different ways, right? So for me, that issue of elsewhere is not necessarily that some perfect place exists somewhere else, anywhere else, right? But it's the injunction to continue to be comparative, right? And I think that comparative way of looking at things is something that needs to extend beyond the academy. We've got so much stuff on comparative urbanism in the last decade, right? Amongst the kinds of people that we know and who we read, right? But in some ways, I think that the comparative needs to be beyond the academic, and that comparative sense of elsewhere, such that some aspects of what goes on in the US might be worth taking into consideration if you're based in China or if you're based in Singapore. But likewise, if you're based in California, then certain aspects of what's going on in Singapore, there might be something to learn from, not just for people who are in the planning profession, but people in other kinds of walks of life.
Well, I myself, I wouldn't use the word top-down planning. I was just kind of responding to the provocation. But I'll say that the top-down planners themselves are panicking that there's no bottom-up demand. So they are trying to be much more consultative than the citizens would want them to be. And you know, they keep reaching out to the citizens to ask them, what do you want, what do you want? But the citizens like, just provide, what the hell? You know?
And
So
what's wrong with that?
there's nothing wrong with that. That's precisely that's so what I'm more interested then is not so much this rediscovery of kind of fantastical democracy, urban democracy. What I'm more interested in is the archivers, the kind of archival feel of the state, the archives, and the knowledge that they accumulate, and the secrets that the population has that tries to resist against the archiving of that knowledge, in which in between the instances of archive and secrets, it's where the urban fabric actually emerges. This is something that I'm just starting to think about, and it comes from my own interested study into into kind of secret societies in Singapore, in Malaya actually, and through the whole colonial period, in which this tussle with the state was basically defining the political development of the area. Right? So secrets and archives and the knowledge and anthropological knowledge coming in, urban knowledge coming in, and so on, creating the very fabric instead of top down and bottom up. Because top down and bottom up is actually quite grey, I think, in this area. At least in Singapore and Malaya, there are more